Hello, I'm Carol Smith. I am a senior research scientist in human-machine interaction here at the SEI, and I'm going to be talking about ethics in AI engineering. Our document markings, and let's get into some background about ethics. So ethics are based on well-founded standards of right and wrong. They're the standards of expected behavior that guide our correct course of action. And according to the Defense Innovation Board, ethical considerations are an inseparable part of research design and deployment for DoD AI systems. Here at the SEI, we look at the AI engineering process and all the aspects therein. And part of this is the work that needs to be done on a continuous basis around data management, algorithms and models, operations, and governance. And within governance is ethics. Ethics are how we ensure that the team is making the system accountable to humans, that the team is cognizant of speculative risks and benefits, that the system will be made to be respectful and secure, and that it will also be honest and usable. And AI does have great potential, but we need to continue to develop it with caution. Many years from now, AI may be a trustworthy substitute for human cognition and abilities. However, for moral and legal purposes, humans must continue to deliberate over situations that involve a person's life, such as the use of force, their quality of life, their health, and their reputation. The Defense Innovation Board has said that the AI will ensure appropriate human judgment, not replace it. So why are ethical principles for AI important? Ethical principles improve consistency. The team that has a diverse set of ethics coming into a project can coalesce on a shared set of technical ethics. And the principles will help to harmonize the cultural variations that those team members have across the group. Ethical principles can also aid in achieving a number of other aspects, including building on existing ethics that the organization has, but really specifying them for the technical problems they're trying to solve. Being able to balance to the pace of change. Industry pressure is often very fast and pushing for quick releases, which is not a bad thing. However, we want to make sure that we're really thinking about all the implications of the work that we're doing, and ethics give us that framework to do that. They also help to provide expectations and explicit permissions to consider and question the breadth of those implications, and to encourage the team to really think about what they're trying to do and why, and what those potential implications are. So who are they for? They're really for the entire team. Everyone creating an AI system should be using technical ethics to ensure that the work remains human-centered. Data scientists and data creators, product managers, machine learning experts, programmers, system architects, and what I like to call curiosity experts. This is a collection of people who focus on situations, users' abilities, and the context that they're doing the work in. These people can activate curiosity via user experience activities, and they usually have titles such as UX researchers, human-machine interaction specialists, or human-computer interaction practitioners, and digital anthropologists. Bringing this whole team together requires early, purposeful work. The team's efforts need to focus not just on the algorithms, although that's a very important part of ethical work, but also about the conduct, the interactions, and the intent and how the system will maintain appropriate levels of trust with the users and the people that are affected by its use. We need to work on efforts to reduce risk and unwanted bias and consider the benefits and the harms to individuals with these systems. So, for example, thinking about what is going to happen with the system initially, and then how does it change over time? Does it change? What changes about it? Can harm be mitigated? And are those mitigations potentially going to require a trade-off against a benefit of the system? And what is that benefit that we might lose? We also can speculate about misuse and abuse, focusing on the potential severe abuse and consequences can really help us to understand the range of situations that might occur, but also understanding those concerns and fears of people who are affected by the AI system can help to identify potential misuse and abuse. So really thinking through all those variations, not necessarily the breadth of them, but the most extreme ones within those situations. Now, to be biased is to be human. Biases are shortcuts. They're ways that we can avoid risk and simplify problems, and they have helped us to be successful as a species for thousands of years. They are not inherently bad, but they may be misapplied. they're implicit or invisible. We're not always aware of them, and they're not necessarily in sync with our conscious beliefs. So, for example, if I see someone in my neighborhood and I think something negative about them, that might be my bias, my inherent bias, and I can think through that situation and realize that that person probably lives in this neighborhood, I just haven't seen them before, or whatever the case may be. I can think through that and change my response and change my thinking about that. And that's the good thing about biases. They can be managed and changed. We can talk about these biases in non-threatening ways to be productive and move forward and to realize what we need to change about the way we're thinking about people and situations. So bias is intrinsic to our experiences, and it comes from many, many different experiences that we've had, such as the social class we grew up in or the social class that we're currently in, our resource availability, our education, our race, gender, and sexuality, as well as culture, theology, and tradition. All of these things and more can contribute to creating the biases that we may bring along with us to our work. And we often have no way of knowing when and why people are biased. Sandra Wachter talks about this. She is a fellow at the University of Oxford, as well as the Alan Turing Institute. And this is an important thing to realize, is that since we don't know what people are thinking, we may not know what the system's biases are either. And so we need to realize that all systems do have some sort of bias. The idea of complete objectivity is misleading. Math and algorithms don't remove the bias that humans have instilled in the data and the systems that we create. Bias can have purpose and it can be helpful, but we need to be aware of it. We need to recognize it within the systems. So our goal needs to be to reduce unintended bias or harmful bias and prevent the inevitable harm that comes with unknowable systems. We need to understand these systems and know how they're affecting people and know how they're going to behave within the realm of the work that we're doing. So bias can enter from a variety of different sources, including the data source. This is the most common source of bias. Because data is created by humans, it is inherently selected and curated by someone with a certain bias. They're thinking about doing work in a certain way. And the way they curate and organize that research or that data is going to change the way that data can be used in the future. Algorithms, of course, as well, and we've seen this through the racial bias and race and gender bias in a variety of different systems that have been created based on, in many cases, biased data sources themselves, but also potentially selecting an algorithm that will result in a bias. And then training. Training can be purposeful and towards a particular outcome, a more aggressive treatment for a medical situation, for example. But it can also be inadvertent due to the content or due to the understanding of the person doing the training. If you're doing an individual training and those individuals have specific biases, they can instill that in the system. This is new and uncomfortable work for many people. They may not have the background or the experience dealing with the situations, and we need to get used to being uncomfortable. Laura Kubach talks about this. She's an author and designer, and she talks about how ethical design is not superficial. It needs to be done very carefully and we need to use intent when we do this work to make sure that we are doing the right thing, that we're making decisions that we mean to make, and that the system is going to work in the way that we intended to. We also need a diverse, talented, and multidisciplinary team. And this group needs to bring their varied skills, problem-framing approaches, and knowledge together so that we can really build great systems. And when I say diversity, I mean diversity in a lot of different ways. So this includes, of course, gender, race, and culture. But this also includes education, their school and their program. For example, if everyone goes to the same school and takes the same course from the same professor, they are likely to approach problems in the same ways, and they will also miss the same issues potentially. So we want that diversity of experiences and thinking processes, age, disability, and health statuses, and more. All these different experiences come together to help us build a great system because great minds think differently. We're not lowering the bar here. We're talking about extending it, making a broad group of people come together to solve problems together. And this is partially because diverse teams mitigate bias. because they focus more on facts, they process facts more carefully, and they are more innovative. Harvard Business Review published a study last year, and they found that they become more aware of their own potential biases, and they entrenched ways of thinking that could otherwise blind them to key information and even lead them to make errors in decision-making processes. So they're aware of these issues, and they use that awareness to help make sure that the work that they're doing is better, which is wonderful. So our grand challenge is to make ethical AI. Here at the SEI, we really want to work with individuals who are interested in doing this work and to help you and to help us all have systems that we can trust at a reasonable way and that we feel is doing the right work. The Department of Defense has adopted ethical principles for artificial intelligence just earlier this year, and we want to take these ethical principles and transform them. But how do we do that? How do we take ethical principles such as responsible, equitable, traceable, reliable, and governable that the DoD has adopted and transform them into trustable ethical AI? There's some steps involved. We do have some guidance already developed, but we need more. So one set is our 11 foundational practices of AI engineering. And this includes the ideas such as treat ethics as both a software design consideration and a policy concern, incorporate user experience and interaction to constantly validate and evolve models and architectures as well as users' experiences, and designing for the interpretation of the inherent ambiguity in the output. How do we make these systems understandable to people? These are all aspects that we need to consider as we move forward in making AI engineering ethical. We also have the SEI checklist and agreement, and this is to be used to prompt conversations for understanding. This is not meant to be a checkbox where you just go through the paces, but rather the start of the work that you need to do. This will help you to test the application of ethics, to reduce risk and unwanted bias, and to support the inspection and mitigation planning that needs to become a constant part of making these systems functional and safe. This is part of the framework for designing trustworthy AI. The checklist came out of these 4 aspects of that framework: accountable to humans, cognizant of speculative risks and benefits, respectful and secure, and honest and usable. And there are a variety of different prompts inside the checklist that, again, are going to help your teams to reveal hidden tasks, work that they still need to do. So it's not as much of a checklist as a way to measure the work that needs to be done. And examples such as humans can easily discern when they're interacting with an AI system versus a human. Is that ready? Is the system been built in such a way that they can discern the difference? And if not, what needs to be done to make sure that that is true? So thinking through that and having those conversations is really important. Teams also need to create communication and mitigation plans, so they need to plan for those unwanted consequences ahead of time so that if they occur, when they occur, they can react in a reasonable way. This includes thinking about who can report an issue with the system and who do they report that to. What is the method for turning the system off? This is really important. And also, once it's turned off, or who has access to turn it off, but once it's turned off, what are the consequences of turning it off? Who's notified? Is there another backup plan, a way that people can continue to get their work done even though the system is no longer working? By thinking through this ahead of time, you'll be ready for situations that may come up. And of course, these conversations for understanding, sharing information, sharing knowledge, and really querying each other and making sure that we all understand what we value, who could be hurt with the system, what lines won't our AI cross, and how are we shifting power? Who is gaining power? Who is losing power with the use of the system? And most importantly, how do we track our progress? How do we know that we're being successful in making ethical, trustable systems? One interesting activity is to reward team members for finding ethics bugs, so really investing the spirit of this work into the team with benefits. Dr. Ayanna Howard presented this when she was on the Artificial Intelligence podcast with Lex Friedman, and she has some other really good ideas for really getting teams excited about this work and engaged in it. We also want to think about how we're going to mitigate the bias that we may be in the system. Part of this is just reviewing the data, thinking about who created it, who organized it, who curated it, how was that done, were respected experts in the area involved in that creation, and what bias does the data already have. Also, think about the system training. We need to engage potentially a diverse team, ideally a diverse team, making sure that they're being mindful of the bias, though, and their own bias as well as the system's bias. And making sure that we understand the approach that's being used for that training and that it's appropriate and that it's going to minimize any additional bias. We also want to activate curiosity, and we can do that by incorporating user experience research and human-computer interaction methods to activate curiosity. And these can involve a variety of different activities, such as having team members take the implicit association test that Harvard University developed. This is a way to understand better what your own biases are and to identify them. And once you know what they are, you can be aware of them and how they might affect your work. You can also try flip it to tested activities when you're going through various scenarios to make sure that you're not being overly biased in the way you're thinking about individuals, performing abusability testing of systems, and creating Black Mirror episodes. This is inspired by a British dystopian sci-fi series that has the same name, and if you haven't seen it, I highly recommend it for thinking through what those most severe abuses might look like of technology. Those potentially severe abuses and consequences exist, particularly for people who are frequently marginalized, and we need to make sure that we're thinking about those individuals, women, racial and ethnic minorities, LGBTQ. All of these individuals have potentially even more significant bad results from using systems, and we need to think about their experiences, particularly when we're designing systems. We want humans to remain in control and making sure that these systems are augmenting our experiences and augmenting our knowledge and not becoming a situation where we lose control. We want to ensure humans can unplug the machines. Grady Booch, an IBMer, has said this in his TED Talk, and that's the spirit of the work that we need to do, making sure that we are in control and that we know what the system is doing and why it's doing it as best as we can and as appropriate given the situation. So again, this grand challenge, we want you to partner with the SEI. We want to catalyze the community in implementing ethics in AI engineering. We want to develop activities to activate curiosity, speculation, creativity, and imagination. And we want to make sure that we're reducing ethical risks of systems. So making sure that potentially unwanted, unintended, and inevitable consequences are avoided. We want to create education and tools to support new and difficult work because we know that this is a huge challenge for some organizations, and we want to experiment to prove what is most effective. Please reach out and contact us if you're interested in partnering with us on this exciting challenge. Thank you.
Hello, I hope you found that helpful, and thank you for joining the Q&A session. Joining me is Alex Van Deusen. She's a design researcher, and I've had the pleasure of working with her on a variety of projects in the Emerging Technology Center here at the SEI. Alex, do we have any questions?
Yeah, hi everyone. Thanks, Carol. I'm really happy to be here. The first question we have today deals with who should be responsible for ethics. So the question is, do you think it is important to have a single person responsible for accounting for ethics?
That's a great question. And in the talk, I talked about everyone taking some responsibility, but at the same time, it really is important to have a single point of responsibility. Everyone should be participating in the work, but having that one person, a centralized role, someone who is ideally responsible across the organization so that they can manage trends and manage ethics in general, that's ideal. And also having individuals within those teams who can coordinate within the deeper questions. And this is work that takes time, and it's not easy work, but it is important to have people responsible so that it doesn't get assumed that someone's taking responsibility for it.
Patty Moore says, excellent presentation. So good work, Carol.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
We do have another question. Is there a certain set of biases that you notice are particularly prevalent in AI for DoD?
Yeah, so there are definitely biases that we all have, unfortunately. Something that was referred to earlier this morning, autonomy bias, is the assumption that machines are smarter than people or that they can fix human issues. And that's a common situation where people just give too much trust. They trust these machines, these systems too much. And the opposite, of course, is a complete lack of trust, a distrust of the systems. And so ideally, we want to help everyone, help warfighters to get appropriate levels of trust and be reasonably skeptical of the systems, so that they both understand the limitations as well as the capabilities of these systems and can work with them in a responsible way. As far as, real biases, patterns of biases, I haven't seen as much of that specifically. Certainly, some of what has already been addressed today as far as recognizing images and things like that, where, I'm thinking of the chicken, of course, the system is going to have situations where it's not going to be as successful, but I haven't seen specific patterns across the DoD. Unfortunately, the AI systems just can't fix problems that we haven't addressed as people yet, and they are limited in situations, but no specific patterns yet that are specific to the DoD.
Another viewer, Marie Francesca, says, "Thanks for your work in this important area."
Oh, thank you. That was very kind.
So, Carol, could you tell maybe our listeners and our viewers if they want to create a more diverse team, do you have some tips or anything that you might suggest?
Yeah, so it is always a challenge. There are lots of great, talented people out there, though. Some organizations and events that you can look out for are, there's an organization called Blacks in Cyber. They have a conference yearly. They just had one a couple months ago. The Anita B. Grace Hopper Celebration is generally an organization that has a huge amount of engineers, academic as well as industry professionals, primarily women. And then the National Society of Black Engineers, they actually just had their conference this past year in Pittsburgh, and they're another great source, places where you can advertise roles as well as just meeting individuals that you might not meet at other organizations.
Great. So previously you talked about biases, and we have a question from the audience, from Patty Moore. Is there a list of specific lessons learned in the area of biases?
Actually, there are a couple of different resources, and I can get you those links after this talk. There is a GitHub repo that has listings of various poor decisions. I can't remember what the repo is called, but I can send out that list later. And there are lists of articles on ethical issues that are being compiled by a class, which I can also share that with you. Not a class I'm teaching, Casey Feisler is teaching that class at a different university, but I can definitely get you links of those and put those into the chat window.
So speaking of resources that might be available, Carol, you've worked on designing ethical AI experiences checklist and agreement. So could you explain a little bit about what you hope to achieve with that checklist and how you recommend it might best be used?
Yeah, so I'm really hoping that this type of activity isn't just used as a checklist and that people are just saying that they're yeah, we thought about that, but rather they're really having those conversations, getting deep into the thoughts about their work, being critical of their work, and really thinking about the ways that it could be misused and abused so that they can prevent harm, unintended harm to people, and to also to help make a better system so that individuals who are using these systems, the warfighters and others who are using these systems, don't need to try to memorize information, but rather can really use the system in a very productive way and a way that makes them feel confident in their work and that really augments their abilities.
So we have another topic on biases. We have another question from the audience. And they ask, can you talk a little bit more on using HCI to combat biases?
Sure. Yeah. So HCI is human-computer interaction. And really part of that is understanding that there are people who are going to be potentially abused by work and can be because of the way the systems are built, because of the potential biases in the data, individuals can be harmed by the systems. And so understanding their needs, their perceptions, the risk that they're potentially having, and by doing that research to understand that, you can then mitigate that effect. It's also just helpful in general to know who the people are who are using the system, and to think about people who you may not typically think about using the system as well. So there are lots of different ways you can use practices of human-computer interaction or user experience research to do that. And the other things are what I mentioned in the talk, are doing those types of activities, those curiosity, creative activities that really help the whole team to coalesce around technical ethics and to think about the problems that might ensue thereafter.
So a final question we have is, early in your talk, you speak about being accountable to humans. So would you mind elaborating more on that topic?
Yeah, and this was talked about earlier today as well by Dr. Cummings. It's really important that we make sure that humans are able to be responsible for decisions, particularly decisions where human life or significant decisions regarding a human's way of living or their safety or anything like that, that humans are involved in those decisions. And that's partially because we just need that accountability. And it's also because these systems are prone to mistakes, as are humans, and we need that secondary check. We need to make sure, is this really what we intend to do? Is this really what we are saying that we want to do? And that way, the system is, again, augmenting our abilities and augmenting our knowledge, and we are not dehumanizing people. Rather, we're really thinking through the situation and specific to the individual that we're dealing with. And just being fair and accountable is really, really important. Thinking a little bit more about that, the situations that we've seen more recently in the news with regard to AI and ethics are those situations where people, again, they have that autonomy bias. They are thinking that the system might be able to manage what was mentioned earlier was a resume system, thinking that if we use an AI system to look at these previous resumes and then to be able to identify new applicants who would be really good matches within this organization, by using that AI system somehow will reduce the amount of bias that we've seen in our hiring in the past, and perhaps we'll be able to get a more diverse staff. Unfortunately, as was mentioned earlier today, what we see is if you start with biased information, so if the resumes are all of existing employees and those existing employees are not diverse, what you're going to get is unfortunately a result of not a diverse group of applicants, because the people who don't fit into that standard, the people who are outsiders, if you will, from the point of view of those resumes, they aren't going to be selected by an AI system any more than the people were selecting before. So you really have to change the organization. You have to change the way work is being done. You have to have a different set of data. And often that lack of good data is one of the reasons why an AI system may not be right for a particular problem. So the humans have to be accountable, but also we have to think ahead as far as, is AI the right solution? Is this really the best way to solve this problem? And that's another way we can be accountable for the systems we're building.
Great, Carol, thank you. I do see one more question here, so maybe we can address that really quickly and then wrap up. Could you share any thoughts on AI ethics that are used by the DoD for defense?
Yeah, certainly. So as was mentioned earlier today, the Defense Innovation Board and the Department of Defense have approved and are using a set of AI ethics principles, and that is being used right now in the work that's being done within AI. So they include things like, making sure that the system is governable, making sure that decisions are being left to a human when life is at stake. And it's really important, and I'm actually very excited about the fact that they're using these, because it is, it does end up making things take a little bit more time, this is work that we need to stop and think about. We really need to make sure we're doing the right things, that these systems are working the way we intend, and that we are making sure that we're doing the right thing with these systems so that we can work smarter and ideally not as hard, but definitely smarter. Great. So thank you for joining our Q&A, and I wish you all luck making smart and ethical and really trustable AI systems. This is really important work, and I look forward to future conversations. Thank you.